Karen Eisenbrey lives in Seattle, Washington, where she leads a quiet, orderly life and invents stories to make up for it. Karen writes fantasy and science fiction novels, as well as short fiction and the occasional poem or song, if it insists. Karen, take it away.
Thank you. I will be giving away a paperback copy of Ego and Endurance, which is not even out yet, but I have my copies. And I'm going to read from the first chapter. It was love at first sight. The ship, blocky and basic and bristling with greebles, wasn't anyone's idea of pretty. But to Ruby Ladd, she was the only thing on the whole moon worth looking at. Diagrams and models couldn't compare to her first glimpse of the real thing. Ruby bounded across the bright, pale surface for a closer look. The cargo transport Polaris had been completely remodeled for this expedition. Just behind the forward viewport, in crisp black letters, the ship displayed her new name, Endurance. On a mission this long, they'd need it. Ruby presented her credentials to the guard at the hatch and entered the airlock. When the light changed from red to green, she opened the inner hatch and stepped into the ship proper. Ruby hung her helmet on a rack beside the hatch and made her way to her quarters to change into her uniform. A faint thud drifted up the passage from the direction of the galley. A maze of transport bins slowed Ruby down, fresh and pre-cooked food that had not yet been stowed. "How long do you estimate it will take to put all this away?" Ruby called as she entered the galley. "We launch at..." A disheveled man in a spacesuit sprawled on the deck. He inhaled with a resonant snore that might have roused the dead, but did not wake him. He clutched an empty tequila bottle like a teddy bear. "Hey!" She shook his shoulder. He snorted and peered at her through half-opened eyelids. "What are you doing here?" "I'm the cook," he slurred. "I'm the cook, ma'am." His brows drew together in a puzzled frown. "No, you're not. I am. And don't call me ma'am. Good night." He closed his eyes again and rolled onto his side. Before he could snore again, Ruby nudged his ribs with her booted foot. "I'm the expedition commander. You're supposed to call me ma'am." He opened his eyes wide. "Oh, you're Ladd?" He sat up. "Yes, and you are?" "Green, ma'am. Lloyd Green. I'm the cook." "You mentioned that. You're also drunk." "Yes, ma'am. I was nervous. Never been on such a long mission before. It won't happen again." "You're right about that. Please leave the ship at once, Mr. Green." "Yes, ma'am." "When shall I report back for launch?" "You misunderstand. You're fired." He struggled to his feet and staggered out of the galley. Transport bins thumped and clattered as he bumped into them on his way down the passage, and again as he returned. "Commander Ladd, ma'am, I have to tell you something." He frowned and scratched his head. "No, you don't. Now get off my ship." She escorted him to the airlock, personally secured his gloves and helmet, and made sure the guard knew Green was not allowed back on Endurance. When she arrived on the bridge, Captain Frank Anderson grinned and rose from his seat. "Welcome aboard, boss." "I like the sound of that." "You've earned it." Anderson smiled down at her. Like most adults, he was a good deal taller than Ruby. "It's a beautiful day on the moon." "It's always a beautiful day on the moon, Skipper." "Cutting it a little close, though. We launch tomorrow. I was afraid we might have to leave without you." He winked. "Ha ha. I was a little worried myself, but the bean counters had to balance the books before they'd let me go." They both sat and faced the forward viewport, gloriously filled with the bright moonscape against the black of space. So how do things look? Excellent. I can hardly wait to take this ship out. He beamed. It's a trash hauler, she teased. A souped-up trash hauler with lots of cool new toys, Anderson corrected. Here's the final expedition roster. He brought up the list. A party of 12? Funny, Ruby had been thinking 11. She had selected the captain and first officer herself and trusted Anderson to put together a solid crew. There was a bit of a problem with the cook. Ruby snorted. Tell me about it. He frowned. You heard already? She hesitated. Maybe not. What was your problem? I had someone all lined up, very experienced. She was supposed to meet us here a week ago, but she fell and tore up the ligaments in her knee. He shook his head. Can you imagine if we had to scrub the mission because we didn't have a cook? The role isn't exactly mission critical, Ruby said. Most of the food is heat and serve. Regulations, though, were required to have someone with the right permits. It worked out anyway. I was able to hire one of the cooks here at Armstrong, a guy named Lloyd Green. He comes highly recommended. Now Ruby's count was down to 10. Yeah, about that. I just fired him. Sorry. Anderson stared. But we launch tomorrow. There's no time to find another. We'll do the cooking. Ruby shrugged. I will if necessary. It's not that hard. But the permits. Funny thing. Ruby held up her Skycom and displayed a document. Anderson allowed himself a smile. What are you doing with a food handler's permit? You wouldn't believe all the permits I have. Every time I get fed up with the suits, I earn or renew another certificate. Keeps me sane and out of trouble. The captain shook his head. So you really just boarded the ship and fired the cook? Ruby patted his shoulder. Green wasn't going to work out. He was dead drunk in the galley. Said he was nervous about the trip. She frowned. You say he came highly recommended. What missions has he been on? None. He was cooking here at the spaceport for the last month. Before that, he worked in several restaurants planetside. She groaned. Well, no wonder he was nervous. I'm sorry, I should have talked to you first. He shook his head. No, you're the boss. Ruby returned her attention to the roster. Now, who's this H. Gunner? I thought you knew, Anderson said. The name seems familiar, but I didn't hire him. Why do we need a documentarian? I can tell you now, we don't have room for a whole camera crew. Ruby gazed at the name on the roster and thought back to her meetings with the money people. That was the extra person. They had an idea for making a profit, even if the expedition failed. But this was beyond anything she'd imagined. I might know, she said. I just hope I'm wrong. Thank you.